Hello, this is Katie McGivens. Welcome to episode 2 of the Bounty Bay Reunion. Back in 2022, I wrote a book called The Body in Bounty Bay, in which I placed 6 real-life authors as characters in the story. The book brought us together as friends, and now we meet once a month to enjoy casual conversations about a variety of subjects, and to offer encouragement and support to one another. We welcome you to listen in as today we discuss writing and the world around us.
The first one was about 10 years ago, a London company, but it didn't come to fruition because the 3 partners quarreled. I think it was about finances. And then in 2020, I signed a movie option with 2 Hollywood directors. You know how these serendipitous, anyway, the one had read my book and he'd actually advised me on my 3rd book. He was an expert on Mayan culture. The 3rd book is set in Mexico. And I signed another movie option, and then COVID quite conveniently happened. So things have ground to a halt, but I live in hope.
I was thinking about this when you put out the topic, that within each genre, there's a framework that you work with, and you sort of, it both gives you a backbone, but it also cages you in. So with mysteries, you've got the red herrings and the sidekick and the murder, and then nobody else can be the bad guy, but you have to work with that. That's your creativity. And with historical romance, you have to be true to the history. You can't rescue Anne Boleyn from the axe or the sword. And I thought with fantasy, oh, that's great, there's no rules, you just write your story and you're not bound. And it is great because I can make up stuff and you world build and you make your own rules, but then you're caged in the middle of it, because in a previous book you've laid down the rules for magic and you can't go against that. And I have to play by those rules, and it can be both creative and very frustrating. But I like that because I get to a point in a story where I want to do something, and then I realize, oh, I've written myself into a corner. What do I do? In Scorched Earth Magic, Sebastian creates a force field around his house, his chateau, to protect the family inside. And then I realized, no, I have to get the body in there. How the hell do I do that? But I like that challenge. And yes, I get to make houses that move, and I get to remember that not all the houses can move, because then you're going to have a problem with them beating each other and banging into each other. But yeah, it's fun.
So in the case of Jack, Harriet, is he a real human being?
Jack, and it's so funny. It's always interesting to me, like that when people become attached to certain characters. And I know you love Jack. There are people who love, and I appreciate that. Jack is an amalgam of a couple of people I knew. So a lot of Jack is absolutely true, and but it's not one sense. It's really 2 people. But what's funny is that after I wrote the book, and this is my first draft that was pretty lousy, as most drafts are, I did give it to one of my closest friends who also had been in the business and knew a lot of these vignettes and I'm present for them. And she said to me, "When did you work for that person?" She named one of the people. And I said, "I never worked for him. I didn't even really know him. I just observed him." And she said, "Well, man, you got him right on." So stories, there was somebody who threw a book out the window. There was somebody who had meltdowns, and I took him and another individual to create that character.
I just have to say that, creativity isn't just about coming up with fantastical plots. That creativity is about finding exactly the right words to describe a character and bring him to life like that. And he is, I have to say, he is one of my favorite characters of the last 2 years in any book. He was so well done, Harriet. So don't sell yourself
Well,
short.
thank you.
Just
Well,
beautiful.
thank you. I'll tell you another thing that's funny. Thank you very much. I'm very flattered. Thank you. That means a lot.
It's amazing what in our minds we struggle, especially this day and age where we've got so much news coming over the wire that is not particularly good, that we try to deal with that, let our characters work that out. But would you all agree? Or
when I started to write this, the fantasy, it was about a small village of people that are isolated, self-isolated from the rest of the world, and they live in fear. And as I was writing it, I began to think about things like intergenerational trauma and the rivalries. But also, I find that what's happening outside the world starts to impact that fear of the other, and the hatred and the racism and divisions that we create starts to influence the story in a way I wasn't anticipating. They say you write what you know, and that's what we know now, this chaotic, messy world right now. It's very scary.
I was going to say at one point that what I like about all of our books is our characters grow. They're not static. And you find that in a lot of series where the characters remain the same from book to book to book. There's no growth in them. And I find that with all of our books, that our characters change, they develop, which I love because they're human beings and we're trying to portray them as such. So there has to be some element of change and development in their relationships and how they react to things going on around them. And that's just the part that I love about all of your books.
That's beautiful, Wendy. And I agree with you. It's really love to see I'd love to see characters grow as well. And as to the world going to pieces around us, when I wrote Adam's Witness, which is my first book, in Canada, we were in actually quite a good place for the LGBTQ community, as probably as good as it had ever been. At least, the people had been allowed to marry for quite some time, and things sort of seemed to even out. And that is not happening anymore. Things are getting really ugly out there. In my own province, I'm seeing, us taking several steps backward in terms of acceptance and human rights and that type of thing. And, it kind of horrifies me to think that this book that I specifically wrote about homophobia specifically is actually way more relevant now than it was then. And I think that's just a horrifying thing.
I'm throwing back more to, I've been giving a lot of thought about my parents. And I think that's because of the war over in the Middle East. My father's still alive. I think I've told you he's 100 years old. My mother passed over a decade ago, but they were products of the 40s and of World War II. And between the two of them, my mother is from the Netherlands, and she stayed in occupied Amsterdam and actually joined the Dutch resistance at that time. And one of her fondest stories is remembering when Amsterdam was liberated by the Canadians. And so she always had a very soft spot in her arms, in her heart for Canadians. She remembers a very large man just scooping her up. She would have been 20, 21, and kissing her, and I said, okay, well, that's interesting. But that was the joy of being finally liberated. I know how you Canadians are. And my father served in the United States Navy and Merchant Marines in the Pacific. So it's interesting that had been in my mind lately, especially talking about generational trauma of what they have gone through and why that resonates with me and why I write my mystery stories in that era. It's something I'm very comfortable with, but there's something to be said about the greatest generation. And I'm pleased, although I miss her, I'm glad, I guess, that my mother did not live long enough to see this day. And my dad is kind of oblivious to everything. I mean, he's still very sharp, but I'm not sure the world really interests him anymore. So it's funny how we carry that over in our writing.
And the one thing that I loved about your most recent book is how you married the veterans with homelessness, or that really resonated with me, because when we first moved to Canada, well, Chuck is a veteran. He's a veteran of the U.S. Navy. He was in Vietnam the whole bit. When we first moved to Canada, we were homeless. We were living on a camping site.
Oh, wow.
And it was the goodness of some individuals at the local Veterans Association that got us into a home. They found me my job because we had no transportation, and I will forever be thankful to them for that. And it's just another example of the goodness that's out there. And I think that's with how awful things are right now. We have to remember that there are good people out there. There are good things that are going on. It's just that the news cycle always hits the bad. Sorry, Joanne.
It's true. But, we have to do this, right? Because the one thing that has been good about the internet and advancing, technology so that we can all absorb news, as horrifying as it is, I think it is good that we know what's going on elsewhere, because we never used to have that kind of immediate reporting. But of course, I come at this from a journalistic perspective. But I wonder, I don't know this. It certainly hasn't helped in Ukraine. But I wonder if someday that sort of more immediate news coverage will help us shorten these disasters. I don't know, but I hold out hope that might happen, that people will just smarten up and, stand up for what's right and get this moving. On the other hand, you see these horrific comments on social media all the time. Everybody hates somebody, it seems, out there. So there's that, negative aspect to it too. But
part of it too is you've got this, what used to be socially unacceptable to say has become acceptable, partially because of social media, but also because you've got politicians that now listen to what
wind people up.
They know that that this gets some points and clicks and support, and it's partially fueled by social media, but it's also because there's the fringe elements of our society are now crawling out from under the rocks and saying the parts that would have been unbelievable. They're saying them out loud and not feeling shame. And when they get caught, they don't feel shame and scurry away back to the rock. They're loud and proud about it. I mean, person hiding in the basement as the voice of truth. And it's so frustrating because they're not shamed. They don't feel disgusted by themselves. I mean,
well, they don't feel required to provide any substantive data to back up their arguments. They want you to do that, but they don't have to do that in return.
I think there's a tremendous amount of manipulation. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think one of the real pitfalls, and particularly for young people, and that's what really makes me really kind of frightened, is that there's so much manipulation and there's so much vulnerability on the part of young people, because they'll listen between TikTok, Instagram, all of these other outlets, and you don't know what's true, what's not true. And, people who either don't have the life experience or the sort of personal discernment to figure out what's really appropriate behavior, they start doing crazy things that are dangerous. And I'm glad my kids aren't young. I'm glad they're not in college anymore. But boy, it's frightening to see what, people, who are either, between the teenagers and in their 20s, are subject to now.
It's a blessing when you're
No,
doing
it's
writing to
highly unlikely.
stop. Oh, I need this word, or I need a recipe for, or you know, what is
How
for
did they
you?
dress then?
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
I agree. How
What
would
kind
they
of guns
dress
did
them?
they use in 1882? I don't know.
Yeah.
The one
Because
I
your
loved was
fans,
how far
your
can a
fans
horse
will know.
travel in in so many hours, or how far can a carriage go in a day?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then having to,
Yeah.
that's why I put mine on the boats a lot. Get out the boat mileage a lot easier than the carriage.
Yeah.
Fan will know. Some fan will know that you've got the year wrong, or that covered buttons were only put onto the sleeves in the year whatever, and it's not the year that you've mentioned the heroine unbuttons her sleeves or something like that. I promise you, even for something as simple as my books, I research every single thing, because something that was around in 1814 wasn't around in 1812, and then the fashions have changed, and oh, it's unbelievable. But your fans will know. This is the problem. They've got nothing to do and all day to do it in. They know exactly.